Today is April 2nd, 2004. We're at the home of Dave and Penny Dilts in Mesick, Michigan, for the purpose of getting a history on the life of Marguerite Gahagan. And my name is Carol Garlow, and with me is Irene Borak, who is interested in writing a book about Marguerite. And Dave, will start with having you state that this tape will belong to the Roscommon Area Historical Society.
This tape will belong to the Roscommon Historical Society.
Thank you. So, we'll have you, either of you, start with Marguerite's early history. What you know about her parents, if anything.
Well, first of all, Marguerite's from Ohio. She was born and raised in the Toledo area and spent her early childhood in the Toledo area. And her uncles and her father were very prominent figures in the standardbred racing scene, which is the trotters and the pacers, as opposed to, that's where you sit behind the horse on a sulky instead of riding on a horse. And it's very big in Ohio and Indiana, and I think that's where they did most of their racing, was in Indiana. But Sonny Jim Gahagan was a prominent figure.
So that was his livelihood?
That was his livelihood. And Will Gahagan, one of her other uncles, was real big in the racing scene. In fact, we've got a big article on Will Gahagan here. It's devoted to him upon his death. But so Marguerite was raised around the standardbred racing scene, and I think they also, one of her, I don't know whether it was her dad or one of her uncles, was also in the newspaper business, because he wrote about, he was kind of a sports writer and covered the racing scene. And so I think that's where she got a lot of her initial interests in writing.
In some of these articles, it talks about her family, and I don't know if it's this one. I think maybe it might be that she didn't come into that foreign. I mean, there were people in her family, and that's probably why she
with the newspaper
studied.
Background.
Yeah, that she studied. She went to school at the Ursulas in Ohio.
At where?
At the Ursulas, the Catholic school.
Oh, okay.
And she kept in contact with them. In fact, after she died, she donated money to them. So it was a very poor. She was Catholic, and she really was into her religion too. She,
that's nice.
right up until they started getting, so they were hugging at church, and she had that osteoporosis, and I think they hurt her, and so at that time was when she stopped going to church.
Oh, no kidding.
You know. But
well, what year was she born?
1907.
1907. So she was born in the Toledo area.
And as far as we know, she was born in that Toledo. There was a story somewhere that some aunt had written, and it gives some information about Gahagan Corners in Ohio. It must have been outside of Toledo, was it? Do you remember that? I don't really remember exactly, but I think her roots were in Ohio. And like I said, she went to school at the Ursulas, and a lot of this,
so that
you're
was
going
the
to get.
college. That's the
No, she went to the University of Detroit for
that
college.
was a Catholic high school then?
Yeah,
or
probably
grade
elementary
school?
or whatever, and it was for women, I believe. I don't think, I think it was all women, yeah. Yeah. And then she went to college at the University of Detroit.
She was Irish, Catholic, and a Democrat, and not necessarily in any particular order. Very staunch in all three of those aspects.
So what was her college degree on that? Was it in journalism?
I'm pretty sure that it was, but I don't know that for, a fact. There might be, I mean, there's some, she kept the history about her. I think you'll find a lot of that information in here. Some of it I think is real factual. Some of it I'm not sure about. And I don't know how you go about finding that, that out.
Differentiating.
Yeah. Except that you will probably see difference in some of these articles.
She really after she worked for the Toledo Blade.
Well, let's go
newspaper.
back, let's leave her, let's finish.
The
Okay.
education?
Let's finish her family and her, school. Was she the only child or what?
No, she was the oldest of 3 children.
Okay.
She had 2 brothers that were younger than her. When she went to school, and she told me this, in fact, so many times, is that when she never would have been able to go to college if it wasn't for some family that lived in Detroit, the Detroit area, and I think they lived in Bloomfield Hills. And it was an aunt and uncle, and she went to live with them and then was able to go to University of Detroit. And she said without help, you know, that's why she did scholarships and stuff, because she just, you know, she didn't have any kids, she never was married, and I
And
just
she had
think
had
that
help
was
to
her
get
way
herself
of
through
giving
college.
back, yeah.
Mhm.
You know, yeah, because she said she never would have been able to go, yeah, if it hadn't have been for
Do you
family.
think her brothers, did her brothers go to college, do you know?
I don't know that. I don't know that. One brother worked for, I think it was, like, like the social service type, department, but I think that was John, but I'm not positive, but I know he lived in Detroit.
What were the
And,
brothers' names?
John and Jim,
And what were the parents' names?
Joseph and Mary.
Oh, for heaven's sake, no wonder.
She had an uncle that was Tom, and he was the turf writer. He's the one that wrote about the horse racing scene.
And it tells him that.
And she had another one that was another uncle that was Dan, and he was also a horse race writer. And then
Their last names were Gahagan, so they were the
Gahagans.
brothers.
Yep.
The father's
They
brothers.
were father's brothers. And I'm not sure what relation Will and Jim were.
I just think maybe they were uncles and cousins and, you know,
Because they were also big in the racehorse scene.
but that attorney, that handled Marguerite's affairs, you know, for a long, long time out of Detroit, I think he was a cousin.
He
Neil-
married.
Neil was.
He married a Gahagan.
No, Neil was a Gahagan, I think, wasn't he?
His name was Neil
I
Hayes.
have to look up, oh, that's true.
His name was
That
Neil
is true,
Hayes.
that is true. I
Nell,
had lots of conversation with him,
Nell Gahagan Hayes,
okay,
and would be Marguerite's cousin.
okay. It's been a long time since I talked to Neil, because he died real suddenly.
Oh, he's gone too?
Mhm. Yeah, there's not many of them left
Mhm.
that we know of. There's a couple of nephews, but that is probably someplace you don't want to go either.
Mhm. Okay, that's all right. Well, then, she came to Michigan to go to college.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Toledo's only what?
Then, well, just
An hour
across the
and a
border,
half,
but then
yeah.
did she stay in Michigan? What were her
Yep.
early work years then?
Well, her early work years were, I think she went to the Detroit Mirror after she got out of University of Detroit. It's Detroit Mercy now.
Mhm.
And she worked as a reporter in the Detroit Mirror, and I think the Mirror may have gotten purchased or consolidated because she ended up at the Times.
It tells in one of these articles, that I don't know where I read it, that they went broke, I think. And then
Oh,
she
the
went-
Mirror did?
And then she went to work for the news, wasn't it?
The Times.
I
Yep,
knew it
yep.
wasn't the Free Press.
It says here, the old Detroit Mirror folded,
Uh-huh.
and she went on to the Times as a society writer.
Oh.
That's where she got a lot of her, notoriety and a lot of her influence as far as being a feature writer, because she covered the Prohibition,
Oh.
and she took the mayor's wife one time to show her that Prohibition wasn't working, and took her to some
Oh, really?
blind pigs and speakeasies that
No
were
kidding.
in existence during Prohibition. And she was quite a young woman. She really had a lot of influence. There's big full-page pictures of her in the newspaper, and she did a lot of undercover stuff. For example, she went into a detention center for women and did a story, and she went in under the guise of being a gangster's a mob person's wife,
Wow.
and
Oh, no kidding.
was sent to this detention center, and while in the detention center saw all of these examples of physical and mental abuse that was being put upon the people that were there, the women that were there.
Inmates.
And then she left there and did a big expose on that.
No kidding.
In fact, she
No wonder
was
somebody didn't get her for that.
very prominent in the Detroit newspaper scene until, and this again is the good old Irish Democrat coming out in her, got active in forming the newspaper guild. And she was one of the leaders in getting the newspaper guild into the Detroit papers. And of course, when you get real active in the union, that you start suffering the ire of management. And so what they did was they took her off of all the feature work she used to do, the society work and all the good detail, and they put her in recorder's court. And so every day she used to have to go to recorder's court, and with all the pimps and prostitutes and everything that would come
No
in to record,
kidding.
the kind of the dregs of
Of
society,
society, yeah.
and she would have to report on the comings and goings of those people. And she did that for, I think, about 12 years in recorder's court. And
kidding.
finally, she'd had enough of that abuse, really. I mean,
Mhm.
was about what it amounted to. And she decided to quit and come north.
Great. So like what year was that when she came up north, you know, or about?
About 1953, something like that.
That's what they talk about, and the first few years that she had the paper, at least I thought it was just a couple because it was so much running back and forth, because she always had her paper set up and printed in Roscommon.
Oh.
And so she'd go from Douglas Lake to Roscommon, you know, to bring that.
Wow.
That's
and
where she
that's where
first
she-
moved to. She moved to Douglas Lake up by Lewisburg.
That's where, yeah,
or
that's where her
Lewiston and
brother was.
Johannesburg.
They owned, a resort, or, you know, rental
Uh-huh.
on the lake up there.
Oh,
And,
okay.
her mother would come up with her, and, you know, I mean, her mother, she said it was very hard. Maybe her mother came before she left Detroit, because she would bring her up, I guess, in the spring, and then come back up to bring her home. I mean, she would visit her, I'm sure, in between times, but she said, oh, it was so hard to get her out of here when
The mother wanted to stay?
didn't want to go back to the city, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
you
She
know.
was a widow by then, you think?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Wow.
So, and I'm not positive how old her mother was, you know, I had that information, and I think we gave back to the family, you know, some family pictures and things like that, because it didn't, I mean, it wasn't important to us,
Mhm.
but it might have been to them,
Mhm.
and
When you say
so,
family, you mean in that house, or is it-
yeah, yeah, well, that was their mother, and, they had two boys, and, I think it was Mike and Dan was the boys' names, but, anyway, Agnes had gotten a hold of me, so I could, you know, I knew where to get a hold of her at.
Who's Agnes?
Agnes was the sister-in-law that was
Oh,
married to
okay.
Jim,
Okay.
and she got cancer. I can't remember exactly when that was, but before we came over here. I mean, it was quite a while before we came over here. And so I don't know if she's living or not. She was still up in that area. So, I can make more coffee.
Okay.
But anyway, no, that's just fine. I'm not drinking very much coffee anymore. It doesn't set well with me. But, anyway,
Well,
I
the place
gave,
up
we
in-
gave this stuff to Agnes.
So the place where she went to at Douglas Lake.
That was Jim and Agnes's. That was her brother's.
Oh,
uh,
okay.
Brother and wife's place up there.
Well, where was she still living then?
Well, I think when she used to bring her mother up there, she probably was still working in Detroit.
Oh,
But she
okay.
was only, as near as we can figure out, she was only 42 when she came up north and started that paper. If it was 53.
Yeah, she was born in '07.
'Cause I'm not sure what the first year was that the newspaper come out, but it must have been about 54 or something like that.
This is dated 54, and they're just telling of what she's doing now, that she started this paper, so it's kind of sort of.
Yeah. About 1954 was the first year for the Northwoods Call.
And did that start as a weekly or?
Yeah, it was
what?
a weekly paper,
Right,
and I
it always
think she
has
did it.
stayed that way.
Yep.
It says that the paper founded in 1953, when she escaped the
53.
city.
Okay.
Yeah, she's got the volume numbers on her stuff, so. 1960, or 752.
Could be.
So
I know.
she's in Detroit, and she's writing this Northwoods Call and have
No.
her.
Well,
No.
the Northwoods Call didn't start until she came up here. Maybe the
Oh,
idea
okay.
did.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, she may have done some of the background before that,
Mhm.
because we have no way of knowing that. But she must have had some idea that she could make a living.
Yeah, you wonder what the inspiration was to,
Yeah.
I mean, to go from the cops beat in Detroit to writing a Northwoods
Probably sick of it,
conservation.
you know.
Well, she probably had some indication of what she enjoyed up north, because she was always someone that enjoyed hiking, walking, bird study, and so on. So I think she had some natural inclinations, but she just decided to put it all together and form a newspaper, because that's what she knew. She knew newspaper writing and reporting. And when she first started the newspaper, she, in fact, right up till she sold the newspaper, she was the editor, the reporter, the newspaper delivery person, and salesperson. She did it all. She had her own route, and she would drop off newspapers, and at the same time she dropped off newspapers, she'd get news for the next one, because everybody she went to, she had her little thick lead pencil and paper, and she would newsprint paper, and she would interview everybody on what they saw, what was going on, and so on.
Okay, so she started this in 52 or 3.
Mhm.
So she moved to Roscommon at that time?
No, she lived for a couple years at Douglas Lake, maybe
Oh,
more.
okay.
More than that. You may find that information when you go through these
Okay.
articles that wrote about that.
I see.
But the first bit, in fact, you know who you might talk to is Winnie Matheson. No? Winnie is, ah,
Should've done this thing.
yeah, because Winnie would be able to, would have been able to fill you in on that, you know?
Well, Dwayne McWilliams might.
Tell you somebody else, and that's Paul Barber.
Yeah, Paul Barber might be able to give
Okay.
you some information about that.
Paul Barber might be able to tell you.
We need to do a history with him anyway, and his family.
And,
Great, okay.
but it may have been 3 or 4 years before she actually got her little cabin built and
Bought
moved
that
down.
property.
Bought
Do
the
you know
property.
who she bought it from?
Yeah, Frosty Wyckoff, and she
Oh,
used
did
to
she?
say the only reason why he sold her that property property because she was a Democrat. That made two of them.
Two of them in Roscommon County.
Oh, don't you love it? Oh, I love it, that's neat.
That's why she and Penny and Frosty got along so well. There was 3 Democrats in Roscommon County
She
then.
doubled the Democratic vote, huh?
That's right.
Oh, that's great. So she bought that property like 55-ish or so?
I'm guessing
56,
somewhere in
somewhere in
that.
there.
I
Somewhere
would say
in
so.
that.
You know, I mean, you could probably go to the records and find
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
In, you know, the Roscommon
Did
County.
Frosty build the cabin for her?
His brother was in the building.
Oh, okay.
It was a Wyckoff, but it was Frosty's brother that built that log cabin.
Neat. Okay, back to the paper. Where, does she write it at her house then? And where does she get
Yep.
it printed?
She had it.
Printed it right there at the Roscommon Herald News.
Oh, okay.
Daryl
I didn't know that.
Elwin Matheson printed it for her from the very beginning. I don't think she ever had it printed anywhere else.
Great.
Not that I know of, anyway.
Mm-mm,
And
I
then
don't
how,
think so.
how big of a route do you think she took this?
Oh, good Lord, she must have driven.
It tells about her car breaking down and you know, I think you can fill in some of the spaces
Sure,
in
sure.
this because one of the reasons why she finally decided to move was to be closer to putting out the paper.
Mhm.
So she didn't have that to do also, but it told about her car, and I'm sure she didn't ever drive anything that was brand new until she was quite old. You know, I think that little Maverick or whatever that little car was she had when she gave up driving probably was brand new.
That was a Ford Maverick.
Yeah. That was the last
So,
one that she owned. I know that.
I'm not familiar with the Northwoods Call a whole lot. Did it cover like UP and everything? It talked about a lot of different
Well,
things, didn't it?
it did, but it mostly concentrated on Otsego, Montmorency, Roscommon, Oscoda counties. You know,
Okay.
because she'd make that loop, and she'd
Well, that's, I
hit,
wondered how big her loop was.
she'd hit Mayo and
Lewiston.
Roscommon.
I remembered that
Lewiston.
I had an aunt that lived in Trenton, and they would, of course, come up to Lewiston and had a cottage in the summertime. I think that was a lot of her following, was people that read her papers when they were up north in the summertime. And she was a little bit, I mean, she really dug into things like the guard camp, and there was a lot of things that she really took it to heart and got to the bottom of things, you know. And my aunt, I was surprised to find out, had taken her newspaper. Well, I just happened to mention it.
And where did your
one-
aunt live?
Well, she lived in Trenton,
Oh, I see.
and
But
they had a
had been
cabin
at
in Lewiston. And so, and I think that happened with a lot of people.
Sure.
I think there was people that probably came to Higgins Lake, you know, Otsego Lake, all those people that vacation up here in the summertime and then go back down south. And
Wonder
I-
how big the circulation was? How many did she print, do you?
It
Tells
tells
that
in
too.
one of them it was $3 a year for a subscription to her paper.
Wow. Wonder how many she printed.
Well, she had certain people that, you know, that bought the subscription, and then she would leave them in those little,
10 cents on the rack.
yeah.
10
yeah,
cents on the rack.
On the rack, yeah.
Great.
By 1961, it was up to $4 a year.
My first recollection of Marguerite was when I had first come to the old Department of Conservation in Roscommon in 1966. She was coming in the regional office, and of course, at that time there were a number of issues that were hot issues within the department, and everybody was afraid that they were going to get quoted in the Northwoods Call if they talked to Marguerite. And so Marguerite would come in the front door, and 3 or 4 of the supervisors would go out the back door, and they'd go out in the field just to avoid Marguerite. And I kept thinking, you know, this little old lady coming in with her little corduroy cap on and her handful of newsprint and pencil, what were they afraid of?
What harm could
You
she
know, what
do?
harm could she do? Well, of course, I was a naturalist at the time with the department, and so I had an immediate bond with Marguerite because my interests and her interests were very closely allied. So if I could tell her about migrations of birds and things that I'd seen in my travels, she would write
She'd
that all
zero in on
down,
that,
and that was
sure.
always in the newspaper about sightings in northern Michigan. So Marguerite and I had a very good relationship, and of course, living just around the corner from her, we became close personal friends of hers because we would go over and decorate her house for Christmas and put what was the name of the deer?
Elmer.
Elmer. Elmer was a big old buck that she had mounted in the cabin, and we used to put tinsel and stuff like that, ornaments hanging from his rack, and she always, it was certain things that she just had to do at Christmas
Sure,
time.
sure.
And put up her tree for her and decorate her tree and.
Where is Elmer?
I
Pardon?
don't know if he went with the auction or where Elmer is. I
Yeah,
have
I
no
haven't-
idea where Elmer is. He very well probably did.
I suspect he went with the auction.
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
guy.
A lot of her belongings were auctioned off at the college. And,
What year was that?
The years,
Mm.
well, it was probably a year after
After
she
she
died,
died.
probably in the second year, because they kept breaking into the cabin, you know, and
And
there
what year did
wasn't
she
gonna
die?
be anything left. She was in Hilltop.
What year did she
Yeah.
die?
1997 is what, we come up with, I guess. I was thinking it was 96.
So she was
But
90.
she was in Hilltop Manor when she died. She lived there, she was there for 4 years.
Oh, very
Yeah. Yeah. And she didn't like it very well.
well. Well, that's
You know, but
understandable.
that was, you know, it was very hard to do that, you know, and I
It
was the
is
power
hard.
of attorney. And, she had fallen, and I took her out, she was bruised on her arm. And I was a little concerned, and she was really complaining about it hurting, and she had that osteoporosis so bad, you just
Mhm.
never knew if she was gonna break a bone. And so I took her up to Mercy Hospital, and of course, when they saw the bruise, they brought in social service, you know, just to check everything out. And that's what they said, this lady should not live alone. And so that, you know, with me, I had such a hard time doing that. It was my thing that said, okay, somebody's telling me I have to do it.
Mhm.
I'm not doing it by myself. So that's when she went into
It's a difficult
Hilltop. And I think she shut down, you know. Besides, she was having some senility problems, you know. She probably shouldn't have been on, and she smoked right up until the time she went into that nursing home.
Oh, yes, she?
Yeah. In fact, she was, when we quit buying her cigarettes, because I had somebody that checked on her and bought groceries and stuff for her, and is when it would go down there and she'd have a package of cigarettes, and she'd say, and she was smoking Durrell's menthol, and she'd have that pack of cigarettes sitting on the table, and she'd say, Durrell's, like she didn't know what they were, you know, D-O-R-A-L. I said, Marguerite, those are your cigarettes. Then I'd come down there, she'd throw them out to feed the birds, you know. And I thought, okay, enough's enough. And so we just kind of, that was the end of it. And, you
Little
know,
things tell you when it's
yeah,
time.
and I don't, you know, knowing what the withdrawal from cigarettes are, I quit 3 years ago, and I can't believe what I went through. What she was going through.
Mhm.
I hope not,
Mhm.
because that was, but I have no way of knowing that either, but she
No.
couldn't have smoked in the nursing home, so it was probably the time to do it.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah, that's the way something tells you when it's
Mhm.
time.
Marguerite was such an astute reporter that, and she knew how to put a story together. And that's one reason why I think the regional supervisors had such a fear of her, was by the time she came in the regional office, she'd already stopped at some field offices, and she'd already stopped at some parks, and she'd already stopped at, talk to fire officers and to conservation officers and so on. And so if there was an issue that was brewing within the department, she had a good idea of what tough questions to ask by the time she got to the regional office. And she would put people on the spot, and it didn't matter how they answered those questions. She was going to have a pretty good grasp of what she wanted to write. And they feared that whatever ended up coming out in the Northwoods Call was going to be read by Lansing, and then they'd be called on the panel. Why did you say this? Why did you say that? And well, I did, but she just put two and two together, and she knew how to come up with the conclusion she needed to come up with. And vast majority of the time, she hit the nail on the head. She was quite right.
Do you think she influenced Lansing very much?
Oh, I think the Northwoods Call had quite an influence on Lansing. I think it.
It was a good check and balance, a check, do you think?
Oh,
What was going on?
absolutely, absolutely,
Sure.
no question about it.
The American system.
That's right.
Great.
She did what newspapers are supposed to do, and that's dig up stories and report the facts. And Marguerite, for the most part, if you told Marguerite you wanted to tell her something off the record, she kept it off the record. But she might use it at another time in another context. And she was a very, very ethical reporter, and consequently, and a very good reporter, so that she was able to ferret out stories on just the very basic of information. And, that's what made her so good. That's why she got that award while she was in the Detroit newspaper system, working for the Detroit Times. She got the Haywood Brown award for reporting excellence, or excellence in journalism, because during the riots, I think they were in '43, the Detroit riots, there was a young black man and a young white man that were convicted of two separate killings. And it was kind of one of these rush to judgment convictions, because of all the hysteria of the time. They needed to find some guilty parties, because there was 30, 40 people killed during those riots in Detroit that year. And so they convicted these two young men, and Marguerite, for whatever reason, started looking into these and dug deeper and deeper, and finally actually got them both retried and subsequently acquitted. And they were supposed to be serving like 5 to 15 and 7.5 to 25. So they, in fact, this right here is a chronology of what went on, and it actually has letters from the young white man and the young black man thanking her for her efforts.
Oh, shit.
And it's extremely interesting to see the whole story.
Entitled "In the Spirit of Haywood Brown."
That was the
H.E.W..
award, yeah, that was the award she
Oh,
won,
okay.
I think.
Yep. In fact, this little piece of type was kind of a desk paperweight that she has, and it says, I have to read it backwards, of course,
You want a mirror?
American Newspaper Guild Special Award 1946, presented to Miss Marguerite Gahagan of the Detroit News for her outstanding work in the spirit of the Haywood Brown, in winning justice for two youths falsely convicted of race riot killings. And she kept that as a,
Did it go from Detroit Times to news then? Did you, I thought you said,
well, I think it did.
because I
eventually.
was sure that it was news that she worked for at the end, but I didn't know that.
Did that say news there?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then it had gone from the Times to the news, because,
Yeah, the thank you letter from the, he calls himself Colored Boy, was dated September 4th, 1946. Well, that's wonderful, isn't it?
that was Fox, and the other one was Tranny, I believe.
Aldo Cannon.
Aldo Tranny was the young white man that was convicted. He was convicted of killing
Wonderful.
a black man, and the black man was, the black youth was convicted of killing a white doctor. And they were looking for someone to
hang that on.
persecute, and they found two people in the area, and they made the assumptions, and only through her good reporting did she actually,
There's a letter
Get
from
this
the
retried.
judge that she went to, that she just kept going to him and saying, I found this information, and finally she broke him down to the point where he thought he better look into it. And so he took the stuff that she discovered, and that's how they got a new trial.
Yeah, his name was Judge Joseph A. Gillis, Gillis. And he ends his letter, I believe it was solely through the efforts of Miss Gahagan that a great injustice was corrected, and all credit should be given to her. Respectfully submitted, Joseph A. Gillis. Isn't that amazing? Who would know all this? See, it's a good thing we came over here. Gosh, that's incredible.
Well, and it's all there, you know, I mean, that kind of stuff is, she kept.
and this is all documentation we would like to have you folks take with you and have it donated to the
Okay.
Historical Society.
Well, we'd be
Because-
honored to be,
You know, there
Yeah.
might be several copies, and if they recopy some of those photographs, I'd like to
well,
have
we
some
can,
of the
we
photographs,
can do that very
you know.
easily. We do that a lot.
Because
lot of
wait
times-
till you see them.
People, if the families prefer to keep their photos, which they often do, we ask if we could just borrow them and make copies and give the originals back. So you could do
Well,
it either
for
way.
Marguerite, yeah, I mean, what are our kids, you know, they remember her and everything, but I think it's important for history, more than anything else, that people know what she was all about.
Yeah, see,
And she took a back seat when she made the donations for scholarships for Roscommon High School. She did that anonymous. She didn't want anybody to know.
but it's known after her death, it's
Mhm.
known.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, I think so. Although the money was set up that it was supposed to go to certain, you know, type of people with certain
Interest.
interests. Although I think it got put in with the fund for Roscommon.
The regular Gary Shagan Scholarship Fund.
Yeah.
So that maybe, that emphasis is lost a little bit.
I
Mhm.
think maybe, yeah,
Probably.
it probably has been. So.
Well, that could be renewed or reminded.
Well, you know, I don't know, I think it wouldn't hurt to be a reminder.
Sure.
Hans Blanche was the one that I spoke to when we set that up. But, you know, as long as kids are benefiting from it, I think you know, I think that's a
That's
good thing, and
important.
that's what she would think too.
Yeah.
You know, she wouldn't want her name even attached.
Mhm.
She was just that kind of person.
So all the years that you worked for the DNR, well, Conservation and DNR, you always had a relationship with her?
Oh,
going?
absolutely.
Yeah.
See her, as long as I was in Roscommon, and I was there in the regional office there for 30 years, and.
What years, what to what?
Oh, 66 to 96.
Great.
The first time I met her, I couldn't believe her, because he would come home and tell stories when he first met her about this woman, about coming on the front door and the guy's going out the back door, and I just, you know, I just, you have this picture that you paint in your mind
Mhm.
of what this person might be like.
Mhm.
And the first time I met her, I expected her to be about 5'10" and weigh 200 pounds, you know? And here was this little bitty woman, I think 110 pounds, you know, at the most. And spoke with, she could cuss like a trooper, but was so elegant. She was truly, was brought up with manners, and, you know,
Yeah, she was a person of very, very distinct contrasts. I mean, she was deeply religious. Yeah, she swore like a trooper. She was certainly not a teetotaler. She enjoyed her beer and she enjoyed her whiskey and she smoked cigarettes.
Mhm.
And then she was raised in a Ursuline convent. Went to, and then went to University of Detroit. Never married. And but I'm sure a lot of that was accrued by working in the behind-the-scenes newspaper atmosphere, because there's a number of photos in here where they're sitting around discussing whatever, her and mostly men,
Mhm.
and invariably they'll have bottles in front of them, and so you know it's kind of a social gathering, yet at the same time they're discussing business. You know, and I'm sure it was kind of I think kind of a rough and tumble profession in those
Oh, I
days
bet.
as well.
Without
You know,
men women in it.
that's right, exactly right. And smoke-filled rooms with deadlines late at night and trying to get the news gathered and the paper put to bed. So it was very, very fast-paced and highly charged atmosphere.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Do you know if there ever were men in her life?
that we don't know. I
Yeah,
never,
you
I
never knew that.
Never asked her that question, and
Nope.
she never volunteered it. So, I have no idea. I mean, you know, I've surmised lots of things,
Mhm.
you know?
Very
Yeah, she
attractive young
yeah,
lady.
I mean,
I'm surprised to see this picture, yeah.
wait till you
Yeah,
see it when
really?
you get into these, they're just,
They had a contest that they ran, and I don't know how long they ran it, but this was it. She was called
that was her when
She was called Limerick Letty, Letty, and they'd put her, splash her picture in the paper. She was Letty, and every week she'd be doing something different. She'd be either boxing or fishing or whatever, and then there'd be a little, almost an advertisement for the readers to submit limericks in a competition.
This is
Oh,
my,
wow.
all of these.
And
This picture, she has on a fur coat and a black hat with two feathers sticking out
Yeah,
from
that
her
was her.
left ear.
That's Marguerite.
You really-
There's, the pictures are here. That's the
Okay.
ones that are kind of neat to see her as a young person, because she was older when we met her.
The best limericks submitted to the newspaper would get, now see, I think she was working for the Toledo Times there.
Toledo Morning Times.
Toledo Morning Times. I said
1931.
Toledo Blade earlier, but that's what it is now, I believe. But it's the Toledo Morning Times. And,
It's 31.
yeah, you could get money big money for the first prize. And now we're talking, when did you say that was? 1931.
March of 31. Isn't
So-
that something?
But
Born
see,
in-
look at, these are all pictures of her. Look at her here. Then there's one of her swinging a golf club and just boxing and,
She's 24 years old there, so that had to be probably her first job
here.
out of college.
And out of the convent.
Yeah, out of the convent, that's right.
Yeah.
She had quite a career, actually, before she got to the Northwoods Call.
Oh, absolutely,
Prior-
absolutely.
See, and all we ever heard about was Northwoods Call.
Well, she was
Uh-huh.
extremely successful.
Yeah. Huh.
Like I say, she was a personal escort of the mayor of Detroit's wife during Prohibition just to do that article on, that expose on how Prohibition wasn't working.
Governor Williams had her he'd given her some committee or something, and she said, I told him, they're not gonna let me sit on this committee.
Yeah, this was a proclamation by G. Menon Williams that puts her on as a member of the Judicial Council of Michigan.
19, to expire in 59.
To expire in 59, right?
Started in 54. Well, and so did she serve?
Well, I don't know.
I have no idea. I don't
I'm
even
not
know what
sure.
serving
Would have
meant
entailed,
as far
yeah.
as,
If
what
it
her
was just an
responsibilities were.
honorary type thing, or,
Huh. Yeah, you can research that one, huh?
Sure.
Irene? So how many years did she actually do the Northwoods Call? Because she sold it to someone else, right?
Sold it to Glenn Shepherd,
Okay.
and that was in,
it might tell you,
I'm not sure what
If
year
it
that
tells you.
was.
What year that was. I don't know that it tells you. It's, well, it'll be on those, volumes. I think it was, can't remember, we should have done this when I could remember really good.
I would say it was about 20 years that she
Uh,
did it. or-
Glenn Shepherd in Charlevoix, that's where he lives, is in Charlevoix. He'd be able to tell you exactly what year that he bought it from Marguerite.
Is that Shepherd like S-H-E-P-H-E-R-D?
I,
S-H-E, let's see, S-H-E-P-H-A-R-D?
seems like it was
H-A-R-D,
like
I believe.
Okay.
75, was it? Or 69 maybe? I can see those books, but I'm
We'd
not
just be-
sure.
We'd just be guessing.
Yep,
Mhm.
yeah, and
Okay.
I'm not so sure
And so
that
the
when
Nor-
you go through this stuff, you'll be able to, that'll be in this information.
And
too.
the Northwoods Call is still in publication,
Yep.
correct?
Sure
But it's
is.
a monthly thing now, I believe,
Oh,
isn't it? He puts it out once a month?
Not even
I,
that often.
I
believe.
I don't know.
7 or 8 issues.
Is it? Yeah, don't know.
Oh, sorry.
7 or 8 issues a year, Irene?
Believe.
Okay. And is it still mostly about the,
Oh, yeah, he's,
The subject
he's
matter.
tried to,
He's
he's tried to
continued what she
maintain the same type of, general orientation that Marguerite had. You know, conservation matters, trying to, bring issues up and, put them before the public and yet still do. Where he has a problem is Glenn, was, I believe, he was in the service and he got injured in the service. I don't know whether he was a parachutist or what he was, but anyway, he got injured, and it's really prohibited him from being real active. So he doesn't get out and around. He does most of his reporting from his home through
Oh.
contacts by phone and so on. And so what the paper lost was a lot of the old-timer stories and things like that that Marguerite used to go out and dig up by being out en route talking to people, and one thing would lead to another, and she'd find out somebody who was an old cook in a lumberjack, a lumber camp or something like that. Well, she'd go interview this person and find out the person had a lot to talk about, so she'd do a whole article on. The old-timer series in the Northwoods Call was probably one of the most well-liked features
yeah,
that
see,
there was.
that's our contact with it. We have, like, she interviewed the Gallimore's daughter, Edith Gallimore Barber, and she told about her childhood and way back, and the same thing with this Gardner story that I'm
Mhm.
looking for in the 1960 issues, was about the first gardeners that came to Roscommon County. And the series goes through a matter of like 6 issues of the Northwoods Call before you get the whole story.
Sure.
Wonderful, it's
Sure.
wonderful history.
Oh, yes.
So she never had another reporter, she always did all this herself?
Did all of it herself.
She has
Amazing.
corrected this right here. Marguerite did this. This is that article right there. She's corrected that. Dan, and my glasses aren't working, but she has gone over this. And she's got 1931, she's put down here 1930.
That she graduated
So
from
she's-
University of Detroit in 1930.
She's gone through this article, which is this one here, and this is from the Pine Whisper, in this thing.
And where's
It's
that
the-
published?
Bay City
This Bay
Times.
City Times.
Oh,
She
okay.
had this in, she would write articles for them over the years.
Okay.
And that's all this stuff right here. And see,
Wow.
this says August 1st, 1978. I don't know if that's when she started that. But she had, what was the name of that group of women down there in that Bay City area?
Bay
The
City Garden Club.
Oh.
The, really were enamored with her, I think, you know. But that's Marguerite's writing. She's the one that corrected that in that newspaper print. And this was hers. This is something that she put together. Nobody else put this together but her. So
Okay, so
if
we're
there's,
talking about a scrapbook of articles that she wrote that appeared in the Pine Whispers.
well, this is
Pine
Pine
Whispers
Whispers in
was
the
the-
Bay City
In the Bay City
Times.
Times. Is that, are these all Pine Whispers?
Yep.
No kidding.
That was the title of her syndicated
1958, I don't know what
Article.
she's written on there. Something, she's corrected that too.
Okay, do you think?
I
is
don't
it
know
Anna
what that
78?
is. What is she,
Inspiration is given importance. It's Pine Whispers. September 17th, 1958.
but she wrote for them, on, like, was it a weekly basis, Dave, that she did that, or was it?
I would only be guessing, I
Yeah.
don't know.
I'm sure you can tell by the dates on these things.
You can go back to microfilm for
Yeah.
Bay City Times and
But-
you'll be able to see.
She
All of
would,
those.
she would write about little sister, little brother, which were raccoons.
Oh.
And she talked about them in a lot of articles. And people would send her money. And I found an envelope in this, because she didn't need the money to help feed the animals.
Mhm.
But she had a little, for 1974, must have been income tax or something like that. And she'd saved that and she wrote what, you know, what she did with the money.
That the people
that-
sent her?
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's something.
You know, they would just read and think that she needed help to feed all these animals and, you know. Kind of neat,
Yeah, very neat.
yeah.
Yeah, she talked about the little people a lot.
Uh, yeah, the little
Oh,
people,
yeah.
that was, and you'll have to tell the story about Marguerite calling you that evening.
Oh, she called me one evening and says, Dilts, she says, get over here. She was in a real agitated state. And I said, okay, I'll be right over. And this was fairly late at night. And so I went over. And she, little sister, the raccoon, she'd let it in the house. And it was in the house, and it curled up on her lap and started giving birth to baby raccoons.
Oh, my gosh.
And so
No
here she
kidding.
was when I got there with a lap full of little raccoons.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
For
Isn't that something?
raccoon to be that comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's where
Well,
was
she
used
fed it.
well.
She fed it. It would come to the house up on the steps on a regular basis and would be fed out of a bowl there. And so she had basically semi-domesticated the animal. She never kept it. It was always lived in the wild, but it would come for its regular feedings. And so when it sought a place to have its young, it felt comfortable and went right inside the house and climbed right up in her lap and proceeded to
That's
have young
amazing.
right there.
So what did you do when you got there?
Oh, we just cleaned him up and
Oh, I
tried
thought-
to,
You
tried
didn't
to.
take a picture?
Yeah, no, we didn't take any
He
pictures.
didn't even know why he was there.
No, I didn't know why I was going there to begin
She
with.
wanted a witness, I
Yeah,
think.
she wanted a witness, I guess.
Well, she probably didn't have too much to do with giving birth to anything, you know? I'm sure it was, but I remember
Well, she
going
probably
to,
wondered what the mother was gonna do when it was all over.
Oh, yeah, well, we just,
Jeez.
we had a box and, some old,
many babies
some
were
old
there?
claws. Well, I have no
You
idea.
don't remember how many?
I
there
don't
were?
remember how many now. In fact, I don't even remember whether I
She
stuck
probably
around for
wrote
the full
about it.
event.
she probably wrote about it.
Yeah.
It was
How
probably.
long ago was that? Were you still in Brookside?
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
Oh my God, that is a story.
But we used to go down there, I'd go down there, whatever, to check on her. But she went through a period of time that, when she needed us, is when we were there when she was a little bit younger, you know. But I can remember going down to the house and having the tree, the Christmas tree, laying on the floor. And she'd say, I set it up twice, I'm not doing it again, the raccoons just take it down again. And so she would let, they would climb the tree and knock it over, and she just decided to leave it
So
laying
you-
on the floor.
Do you think she had them in the house like daily?
no, I don't think so. I don't think daily.
But
And I
whenever,
think it
but
probably
Occasionally.
was that one
Occasionally.
raccoon,
Yep,
you know, there was one raccoon, but over a period of years, it was always little sister. All raccoons was little sister, little brother.
Oh, okay.
You know, I don't think, you know, I have no idea how long that raccoon lived.
no idea.
Isn't that something? Had the babies on her lap. It's just amazing.
She kept a gun right inside the door, right behind the front door.
What kind of gun?
It was a 22. And she had a big cowbell as well. And whenever she saw a hunter come on her property, she would go out and ring that cowbell, and if she had to, she'd shoot that 22 up in the air, and she'd curse and let them know in no certain terms were they supposed to be on that property. So I don't think very many people ever trespassed on her property more than once, because
Probably not.
she was pretty irate when that happened. And yet she was not an anti-hunter by any means. She was really quite a middle of the road conservationist. I mean, she realized the importance of harvesting game and managing wildlife. But by the same token, her little sanctuary right there was her little sanctuary, and she wasn't going to have any of that
Did she go
take
fishing, do you
place.
know?
I don't think she ever fished that I know of.
Well, there's a picture of her, but I think that was all
Staged for the newspaper. Nope, she was an interesting person, every stretch of the imagination.
I guess so.
She talked about there at that cabin about a bear hearing noise at the back door, because there's a back door to that off the utility room it was, and went there and there was a bear on the other side of that door when she opened it.
Isn't that something?
I've talked to some of the Bear Locker boys who live down the road too, and they say that they would often go over with, something they found in the woods or.
Sure.
She got along with children pretty well, I take it?
Oh, yeah, especially those children that had an interest in anything wild. If they showed any interest or any acumen in that arena, she was very interested in them. In fact, she was a repository for all of the wounded animals and injured birds and so on and so forth. She would take care of them. She would splint wings and things like that. And I remember taking a great blue heron that was injured over to her, and we put it in the garage, and we put a pail of water in there, and unbeknownst to us, the bird had been shot, and shot with a shotgun, and so it was a lot further along than we had thought. But I can remember her writing the article about how that bird hunted right till the very end, because she had gone out there the next morning and the bird was dead in the garage, but it had speared 2 mice and drowned them in that pail of water
No kidding.
during the night.
Wow.
And so it was still doing some hunting right up till the very end. And so she had all kinds of experiences, of course, because
Isn't that something?
people would bring all sorts of songbirds, for example. If there was ever a songbird or something like that around, people would seek me out or drop off at the office. I would take it to Marguerite, and she'd care for it and feed it and so on. And quite a number of times they managed to survive.
Was she actually licensed to do that? I mean,
No,
yeah,
no, there was
I
no,
think anymore.
yeah, there was no licensing or anything at that time. We just, yep, did what you could. That was it.
Then any birds that hit the window or whatever, she would put them in a bag
Yeah.
and bring them to Dave, and he would use them in the exhibits in the state park. They had a lot of them.
Make study skins out of them for our outdoor centers, and so we were always the repository for dead animals, and she'd pick up roadkills or whatever was in her route and say, "Here, I bet you'd like one of these."
And I was scared to death of birds, so when I'd see her coming, I knew usually what it was.
How does she feel about
Uh-huh.
cats?
Oh, that was one of the things the 22 was for. Yeah, she'd jump out of her chair and issue some type of expletive and run to the front door, and if it was a cowbell, it was usually a cat or a dog or a hunter or something like that. And if it was something that reoccurred very many times, as a feral cat or something like that, she also had the 22, but
Was she involved with Kirtland at all? That you know?